Hey everybody, here to let you know that due to popular demand, Imperial Yeast has decided to extend the availability of their latest seasonal strain, A37 POG, through September of 2020. The folks I know who have used this stuff absolutely love it. So what is it? A37 POG is a single Kveik isolate known to produce tons of guava, passion fruit, pineapple, and orange aromas reminiscent of the classic juice blend. Like all Kveik strains, it is highly versatile and can be fermented on the warmer end of the spectrum to produce tropical aromas, or you can ferment it cooler to produce beers with cleaner ester profiles. Grab yourself some A37 POG before it's too late, and make sure to check out all Imperial Yeast has to offer at imperialyeast.com. Thanks to increased knowledge and technological advancements, brewing has come a long way since the ancient Egyptians first wrote about it over 7,000 years ago. These days, fermenters come in myriad forms, though one of the earliest materials used to construct such vessels was wood. And while it's no longer common to keep actively fermenting beer in barrels, they're quite popular for storing certain styles over longer periods of time. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this exBEERience episode to discuss our experiences using barrels in brewing is contributor Andy Carter.
Yeah, I think I've been brewing for about 10 or 11 years now, and almost half of that has involved wooden barrels in some way, shape, or form. You know, I think the processes are a little different, and I know this will be a little more of an advanced topic, but I think following a couple simple tips and tricks will be really good for those people looking to jump into their first barrel project.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to hearing about it. Full disclosure, I've never owned or used a barrel in my brewing at all, which isn't to say I don't appreciate what it can contribute to beer. I actually really like barrel-aged beers. But for this reason, I'm really excited to hear what you have to share about your experiences using barrels, because again, I have none. But perhaps you can convince me to give it a go myself. I'm looking forward to seeing if you can't influence me a little bit, Andy.
Absolutely.
All right. If you like what we're up to and you want to keep us doing it, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy. By committing to a small monthly pledge over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world coming up later this month. A couple cool dudes from hop company Haas, Alejandro Gonzalez and Jeff Daly, will be taking questions from patrons. If you like geeking out on all things hops like we do, this is a session you do not want to miss. To be a part of it, you have to make your pledge by Friday, September 25th, 2020, so get on it. All past sessions are available on our private Facebook page, so patrons can go back and watch them whenever they like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who have an array of amazing purpose-built stainless brewing products to improve your brew day. If you're looking for a high-quality pilot brewery, make sure to check out the gorgeous BH15 single-tier system, which comes with a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Head over to brewershardware.com to see what they're all about, and make sure to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Listener Joe Wolscheid wrote in with a correction on something we said in our last episode on brewing with oats. I have a feeling he was not the only one who noticed this. At some point during the episode, Matt and I were talking about golden naked oats, and we misspoke a bit. As Joe said, golden naked oats is a huskless crystal malt and has little to no diastatic power, so it shouldn't be treated the same as an oat malt. Thank you for the correction, Joe. It certainly wasn't our intent to steer anybody the wrong way, not to make excuses, but like I said in that episode, I've never used golden naked oats and blame this slip up on my own ignorance. Now, I actually just ordered some golden naked oats because that we are still influenced by ourselves sometimes. I ordered some from More Beer because I want to try them out. That sounds, the fact that they're a huskless crystal malt makes them sound even more interesting to me. Andy, have you had any experience with golden naked oats?
No, I think, my recent history of looking at, oats is usually in these New England or hazy IPAs. And I just thought, you said that, and I think about, oh, wow, I never even considered that. I usually just ordered flaked oats or rolled oats or something like that. I want to say many years ago we did a stout with some golden naked oats, or maybe Mike Tonsmeyer and Mad Fermentationist did it. But it's cool to hear that, because I'd like to try that, because it adds a little more of a caramel taste to the beer. in a different way, kind of like how there's dehusked carafa malts. They're different than a roasted malt or something like that. So I wonder how those would go to like a C10 or a C20, because I can't believe they're too caramelized. But that's interesting.
Yeah,
I think one issue though, if you're worried about your lauter, I'd be a little bit worried if there's no husk, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, or if you do brew in a bag, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter, right?
Brew in a bag, it doesn't matter, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's my plan. I'm right now. I'm tentatively planning on doing just a blonde ale, really simple, 80 to 85% pale malt, and then I'll do the rest golden naked oats and see how it comes out. I just really want to taste what that I guess that grain, crystal malt contributes to the beer. So again, Joe, thank you so much for the feedback, for the correction. If you have show feedback or any corrections, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. It's no secret that I'm a huge fan of pale yellow lager styles, including the one made popular by the likes of Bud Miller and Coors. Well, listener James Bywater knows this well and sent me a can of American lager that I believe was made by Ketos Brewing out of Salt Lake City, Utah. I did lose the note that he included with his package of beer, so it's possibly homebrewed by James. I'm not sure. Hopefully he hits me up and corrects me on this. But seeing as he sent me a bunch of stuff from Ketos, I do think that was the source.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Look how clear this beer is. It's a beautiful beer.
This looks like something that I would enjoy and you would enjoy. This might be the synergy that is the Jers Tims. What do you got? Take a sip. No?
This is very good. Man, that's a good clean beer.
I love you so much, Timmy. Oh my
Oh,
God.
I knew you'd like it.
I want to make love to it. I want it to make love to me. This is incredible.
This is a good beer.
This is an amazing beer.
What do you think it is?
I think it's a Pilsner.
All right.
Probably a light Pilsner, but what else, dog?
But who knows?
Hey, do you love it?
I do love it.
I love it too. Let's drink it down.
That would be a beer to drink by the pool all day long. Oh, it's very good. Clean.
Let's give this, I got to be honest, I don't know how you feel.
I feel it.
I feel like this is the best beer I've ever had in my entire life.
Well, let's not get crazy. It's good beer.
I'd like to give it 75 Jersey Regans. What about you?
I'm only going to give it 50.
Do you like it?
I do love it.
Then we love it. If the moon was made of this beer, would you drink it?
I think I would.
I know I would.
I know I would too. This beer was absolutely excellent. No faults at all that I could detect. I would drink the crap out of this stuff, whether I'm sitting next to a pool in the summertime or a fireplace in the winter. It had a really nice bready malt character up front with a spicy, earthy hop thing going on in the finish. It was brilliantly clear, clean, crushable, insanely refreshing. I want so much more of this beer.
It's interesting, sometimes you get those chili habanero meads thrown at Jersey and Tim, and today they just got just a fastball, hit it right down the middle line. It's great. Yeah, definitely. If it was the contributors or it was the pro brewers, I mean, win either way, right? That sounded like a great beer. I want a 6-pack of it right now.
Oh, I'm telling you, I think. In the age that we're in right now, we're really fortunate. For those of us who like these cleaner lager styles, it seems like a lot of breweries are shifting their focus to kind of being more technically inclined and brewing these beers and trying to make them as good as they possibly can. There are some breweries out there who are absolutely nailing it. And I'm telling you, I think if Ketos made this, you're lucky to live near them, James. If you made this beer, James, my word, send me more. Send me the recipe. You're an incredible brewer. So again, I apologize for losing the note. I misplace things every once in a while, so that's my bad. But it was an absolutely delicious beer. If you want your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. When we come back from this short break, the focus will be on brewing with barrels. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. Over the nearly 2 decades that I've been drinking craft beer, I've had a ton that have spent some amount of time in a barrel, both commercial and homebrewed versions. And while the good majority have been quite pleasant, I never took the step of using a barrel myself. However, that is not the case for you, Andy.
Yeah, so about 6 years ago now, maybe even more than that, the Ventura Independent Beer Enthusiasts got a wine barrel. It had just been dumped, and the project was to make sour blonde and sour red ales, lambic, goose, Flanders red. And, I felt pretty young in the homebrew community, but I'm like, I like these sour beers. I want to jump in. And, I had learned everything from the group that had already established, they were only reading things off the internet. So you're pulling all these details together to make it. And, eventually, years later, that beer came out of the barrel, tasted great. So it really emboldened me to do more wine barrel aging. So what are we talking about with barrel aging beer? So first kind of upfront categories is what kind of beer are you going to make? And that's going to dictate the rest of the episode and how you're going to find stuff. So, I'm just going to classify it in 2 broad categories: clean barrel aging and sour or wild barrel aging.
Sure.
So that's how we're going to start the discussion. And I think with the rest of the segments, how you get a barrel, what you do with it when you get it, those are always going to be the 2 things we're going to go back and forth from. So first step, you got to find a barrel. I think the best way for clean barrel aging is there's so many new craft distilleries out there. Mm-hmm. There's probably one nearby where you're living or not too far. Those, if they're willing to part with some barrels or sell you the barrels, I think that's a great place because first, you know where it came from, and second, it's close by, so your shipping is good. And third, and I think actually most important, other than the quality of the liquor that was in them previously, is that they're going to be wet when you get them. You want them to still have the contents of the remaining little bit of contents you're getting from them still in them, because when wood dries, it becomes very hard to work with.
And my understanding is that when, again, ignorant here, admittedly, yes. But when, thank you, Andy, when wood dries out like that, it can split, it can crack, and then it's really difficult to fix that, to get it back to the point where you want it to age beer in, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly. Because what happens is these are naturally porous things. They're actually, it's a pretty amazing. Barrels are held together by them sitting correctly in those hoops that keep them together. There's no glue. They're not bound either by the metal and the tension of the heads and the wood and the hoops. So as soon as they shrink a little bit, it's not a sealed vessel anymore, right? So that's the problem. So barrels are made by I did a little research by cooperages, right? They're yes.
So a fresh brand new barrel a cooperage picks the wood, and then they have their process for producing this barrel. I think it's a pretty time-honored traditional process for making barrels.
Yeah, it takes years because the wood has to be dried out in a certain way so that it can be charred later. It's an incredible process. I highly recommend people go on YouTube and watch these places. How these guys even do it. I mean, it's decades.
It's a fascinating process.
It's crazy. Yeah. So when we get so that's for clean barrel aging. You probably have a bourbon producer or some type of spirits producer. And a lot of my examples for clean barrel aging will come from bourbon, because I think that's the kind of the main clean spirit people are using. Now for wine barrel aging, one downside is there's a lot less wine being produced in small barrels, and we'll get into why in a minute. So usually these are going to be 50 to 60 gallon barrels.
Right.
That's not to say you can't make a good sour beer out of a smaller wine barrel. And when I say wine barrels, I'm probably going to gravitate to talking about wine-based sour ales or some type of that. Or really in sour beer aging, these are much longer processes. So the staves on a wine barrel are a lot thicker, and they'll allow for less oxidation over time, so you get a longer draw, and you're less concerned about that flavor of what was in the barrel for the sour beer aging, as less so than what you're concerned with the bourbon, because you want that bourbon character in the final beer.
Now, my understanding is when it comes to, I guess, barrel treatment, I love bourbon. I love most whiskeys, in fact. And
Sure.
so my knowledge of barrels is based more on that than it is on using them for beer. My understanding is that not all barrels are created and treated equally. And in particular, that bourbon barrels are always charred, which means that they're burnt from the inside out to create a black charred surface on the inside, which serves, I believe, as a form of filtration, but it also contributes to the quality of that bourbon that you're drinking. You can't call it bourbon. I mean, there's a million things in the rules in the whiskey world, but you can't call it bourbon if it's not in a charred barrel. So you can, if you choose that spirit as what is making your barrel wet, basically, if you're getting a bourbon barrel, you have to take into account the fact that you've got that charred inside, right?
Yes, correct. And you're going for that flavor, because that's what bourbon. That's so much of what bourbon's character comes from, is that char, and that's because wood is a plant and it has carbohydrates in it, and when you burn, you get sugars, and those sugars are what create that flavor downstream. To go really far, and this is not something that's going to happen in your house, but to give you an example of how like American bourbon is produced, you take this barrel, you burn the crap out of it on the inside, and then you fill it with the whiskey, the white dog, the clear spirit. So it's been distilled, and it's around 120 proof, and you fill the barrel and you throw it in the rick house, which is just a huge kind of airy house out in Kentucky. And it just sits there. It sits there for years, and they move the barrels around and stuff. And what's going on is, and it took me a long time to get this concept correct, but when I understood it finally, it made perfect sense. The barrel is a big filter, and as it heats up and cools down, the whiskey goes through the charcoal into the wood and back in and out. It's getting air, and it's being pulled and sucked because of heat expansion and contraction. That's creating almost a filter, a charcoal sieve that's filtering the alcohol and getting that flavor and that color. That's why the bourbon comes out dark when it's done with aging. So that's actually kind of mellowing the product and everything and producing all those great flavors.
Yeah.
So it's this really, again, really complicated, delicate process, but that's how you get the bourbon at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You're not going to be doing that at home necessarily unless you want to heat and cool this barrel, but that's how it's produced. That's how that happens. And really what we're going to do as brewers is utilize that finished, it's done barrel, and then get what flavor is left out in that barrel out and into our beer.
Yeah. Now there's bourbon, and that's that nice charred barrel. Correct me if I'm wrong. It is, you're likely not going to find a non-toasted, at the very least, barrel, right? All the wood is going to be toasted. It's not like you're going to get a green wood barrel, right? I mean, that would obviously wouldn't work out because of it would contract and it would probably crack. But
so you're not going to get that. There's going to be some drying to it, but then there's charring, which is another side to it. So in bourbon production, you have very high toast, but actually you can get different levels of toast. And the brewery, the BRUERY commercial brewery, did a series of beers with different toasts.
Oh yeah.
Of their beer aged I think those were just plain barrels, not bourbon aged or something, just fresh, new to them barrels, different toasts, and you can try different toasts on beer. in wine can have different toast levels too. They don't go to the extent of bourbon, of course, because they're not looking for big character like that. They're just going to get a light wood character. But yeah, you can absolutely buy barrels completely new. If you're a home winemaker, you could definitely get these smaller barrels. And you can get not just different toast levels, but different types of wood. And there's one product, I believe it's called the honeycomb product, which is different types of wood. And I think that's a whole nother kind of ball of wax, to be honest, because the different types of wood, oak is just one type. There are so many different types of oak, but also different types of wood, and they contribute crazy different flavors.
Yes,
and
they
it's
do.
So cool. It's a really fun thing I've done only a little bit of work on, but man, it's a lot of fun, and I really want to probably explore that into a whole different series. But yeah.
So let's talk about wood for a minute.
Sure.
When I think of barrels, the only type of wood that comes to mind is oak. Now, like you mentioned, I've never used a real barrel, but I've used multiple different wood products, and you can get like those honeycomb products. You can get mesquite. You can get, and it does what you would expect. You get like a mesquite barbecue thing from it. It's very interesting. But when it comes to barrels, all I've ever heard is oak. Is that for the base wood? And I know that it comes in different varieties. We'll talk about that. But is oak like really all you're going to find out there, or are there other types of barrels?
I think if you get into the weeds in some of the sour beer stuff, because there are sour beer production in Belgium, they use chestnut and some other woods. I could be wrong about that. We can look that up, but there is definitely not only oak out there in wooden barrels, but I think that's the minority case because oak is just such a tried and true use of it, and it really depends on what you want out of the product in the end. I think it really depends. I think because there's so much oak available, that's the go-to wood. Yeah, but I think it also depends on what wood is around. If you have a barrel and you have a chestnut farm and you have chestnut wood, probably going to make barrels out of it. So
yeah. So then I want to talk about the different types of, I guess what I would call like a regional difference between the type of oak. You got American, French, Hungarian. But first, we spent some time talking a little bit about the like bourbon barrels. I think those are really popular. And I feel like when it comes to the style that you're brewing, the type of barrel that you end up going with and where you get it from will kind of you select it based on the style of beer you're going after. So for example, when I think of bourbon barrel aged, I'm thinking of big hefty porter or stout, something like that, something you want to get, you want that more vanilla, what I tend to get as almost an amaretto like character from a good bourbon, that fits really well with that. A lot of people use, like you said, wine barrels. My understanding is it's largely red wine barrels. And again, I've had so many wine barrel aged beers, and I would have to say probably 90% of them are sour beers in some form or fashion. I believe Russian River uses a lot, given where they live. They're up in close to Napa County, so they're by all these wineries. And if you've never had a Russian River sour beer, you are missing out. It's amazing, and you get that vinous kind of winey, grapey thing, and it just melds so well with that really acidic, complex, fermentation character of the beer. You can go to wineries and ask them. Where I live in Fresno, there's quite a few wineries as well, and so I know people who have gone and talked to wineries, and you're able to work out deals with them to get their used barrels. Are there other places you can go, say online, if you don't want a 50 gallon barrel? Are there? I recall, 4 or 5 years ago, there was like Woodinville whiskey, and they would sell like 5 gallon barrels. And I had a couple of friends who had those sitting on their bars where they would just age beer for a couple of years. But are there other places people can grab these things from?
Yeah, there's definitely a few. You'll find them on the homebrew, some of the homebrew shops online. They'll get an acquisition of barrels. I think the big one is Balcones barrels, and they don't sell them from their website directly, but they'll sell them to certain homebrew shops, and then you buy them online. And that's really one of the main places. And they have a reputation, which I think is important. Like I said earlier, you want to make sure that barrel's as fresh as possible. It's not dried out. Yeah, and they've had a good reputation there. You kind of have to ask around. I think, the ways we've gotten them is not through, or at least how I've gotten them is not through the websites, but I've heard of great, obviously I've heard good people have had good results. You guys kind of look around a little bit and see and call them and kind of say, hey, how old is this? When do you think you're going to get new ones and stuff? And it never hurts to ask. Yeah. Because, what's important with wines to some extent, but especially with bourbon, can only use that barrel once. It's out the door. Otherwise, it's going to become another spirit. So they don't necessarily need that barrel after its first age. They're, if it's holding liquid, they may use it for another product, but more or less, it's like that's just taking up space for the next bourbon barrel to be made. So they're willing to get rid of it. Usually, you need to, if they want to make some money, we paid a little bit of money for the barrel. We paid more in shipping than anything else.
Right. But it's high quality stuff, and it works out. So you shop around a little bit, I think. And so I'm thinking, if I'm designing a beer that I think, man, this is going to work really well in a barrel, or the club. I think for a lot of the 50-gallon barrels, you really are, unless you're Brian Hall,
You need multiple systems.
Yeah, so. Right. And so but there are these various places. So I'm thinking distilleries, I'm thinking wineries. Another place that I've heard of, and I kind of like, colloquially heard this referred to as third use barrels, is when you go to a brewery who's been using a barrel, and then you ask them, hey, when you're done with that one that you got from a distillery or a winery, can I pay you for it or take it off your hands or whatever? And people have had good results doing that as well. I don't know how common that is.
I'll say it's less common. I mean, it gets to your relationship with your local craft brewery. But if it's the main thing I see there is they're selling them as these guys are done. And they'll even say, please don't age beer in this. But
use it as a table, right?
Use it as a table, yeah. Because unlike a distillery or winery, the brewery wants to use that thing until it's gone. And they're not necessarily looking to get rid of it. Now, the bigger sour beer producers might need to make new rooms. So they're like, okay, we're going to get rid of this one or that one. I would just say, if you're friends with them and say, hey, if you have one that's almost done, do you think we could use it as a club project? And I bet they would say yes.
Yeah.
Just got to just try and see because in the end, I would say as a note, if you're trying to get, and we're going to structure this as clean beer making and sour beer making. For clean beer production, once the bourbon barrel has seen a couple turns, there's a lot less bourbon character in it now. But for wine barrels, as long as they're not having some characteristic issues, which we'll get into later in the show, or characteristic problems that can occur. I mean, that wine barrel is still good to go for multiple sour beer uses because you're not not trying to get as much of that original wine character out of the barrel as much as you're just getting a nice, calm place for the sour beer to mature.
On oak. I mean, that's the key.
Yeah, on oak. Yeah.
So when we think about the size of the barrel, and this isn't something I think most craft brewers are worried about. They're going to go get the big barrels if they're going all in, right? But on the homebrew scale, I have a buddy, Lawrence Washington, who lives up in Madera, and we'd go to his house for club meetings, and he had this cute little barrel that it was a 5-gallon barrel. Which, by the way, a 5-gallon barrel looks a lot smaller than you'd think. They're not huge. But he had this cool little barrel that he had sitting out. And I always wondered if you were to age a beer in that small 5-gallon barrel and age the same exact beer, and again, assuming all things equal, in a 50-gallon barrel, what differences might you expect based on things like surface area and oxygen exchange and stuff like that? Or would there be a difference, do you think?
Yeah, there'd absolutely be a difference. In general, and then again, I'm coming from a place with my small amounts of experience and a lot of heuristics I hear from other people. So in general, what's going to happen in barrel aging is it's not a oxygen impermeable device. And we want that because we want a little bit of that micro-oxidation in the beer. We want it to get a little bit of air because that's going to evolve the beer. Now, as we all know, oxygen is the enemy of beer. We want to avoid post-fermentation oxygen as much as possible, but in these select cases, a little bit goes a long way.
Okay.
So in the case of clean beer aging, I've been finding, you really want to minimize that because you're just going to get the beer to be kind of in a weird place. And in both cases, sour and clean beer aging. But let's say for clean beer aging, we want to minimize that. So we keep our barrels topped up. And, if it's a smaller barrel, there's more surface area to volume ratio.
Sure.
So you're going to get more air over time than in a big one. So in general, if you're aging the 5 and say a 50 next to each other in the same other environments, the same beer, everything's the same as possible, that smaller one's just going to evolve more rapidly than the big one because it's just going to be able to get more air in time. So is that a negative or is it a positive? Well, you have to just try the beer and see, but you have to try to minimize putting more air into the barrel when you do the sampling. So
yeah,
it's more of a monitoring game than anything. And in sour beer production, I would say it's much more apparent when oxygen has become too much because if it's a complex microbiological environment with Brettanomyces and Pediococcus and everything. A little bit of air getting in there will create some acetic acid, some other things, some other negative off flavors. You'll notice much more quickly. And we've noticed that with our barrels, if they just sit around too long or they get too hot and then they cool down and suck air in. And again, if you don't top them off, which you should be keeping the top of them filled because you'll have evaporation, that's where problems will occur. So in both cases, bigger will age more slowly, but they're still aging. So just monitoring them is still important.
Yeah, that's interesting. The topping off thing, making sure that barrel stays full, is something that I've heard as being a mistake, people failing to do that quite a bit. When you go and read forums and that oxidation thing, particularly with sour beers. I'm not a fan of sour beers that have a prominent acetic character. It doesn't. I don't like drinking vinegar, but it's fascinating to me. And just as an aside, again, to bring up Russian River and also the brewery, these huge breweries who are using these barrels by the thousands, I would imagine, or hundreds at the very least. I can drink a brewery beer or a Russian River beer and barely detect any acetic character whatsoever, which to me just screams that they're doing it right. And to emulate their process and to produce a homebrew that tastes that good would be amazing.
Yeah, and I think the big thing there is they have the experience of time. And you have mistakes. You're not tasting their mistakes.
Right.
And that is the one thing of having a fleet of barrels and really well-trained people. Specifically like another one, one of the second gen or third gen, I don't know how many you want to count generations of brewers, but after the brewery, there was guys from there that started Rare Barrel in the Bay Area, right? Yeah. And they took all that knowledge and really tried to hone it down into like, all right, what's a scientific process reducing to the best practices that we can have, and they've evolved so much from their first beers too.
They're phenomenal.
Yeah, you unfortunately at home your N is going to be 1, maybe 2, so you're going to just try it and see. So the hope here, giving you a little bit of knowledge here and some resources to lean on, is that your first beer in the barrel is going to come out as good as possible. And I think the first heuristic to look at is keeping that barrel topped off.
Yeah.
What that's going to mean is planning for the future of that barrel, from getting it to aging it to emptying it.
Okay, so before we finish up this segment and move into the next one where we actually talk about using the barrel, let's spend a minute talking about these regional differences in the type of wood, the type of oak that barrels can be made with. My understanding, again, I don't know, I'm not an expert on this stuff, is that there's American oak, French oak, and Hungarian oak, and that there's widespread belief that these 3 different woods, which understandably contribute different characteristics to beer.
Yeah, in general, people are using those different types of oaks to get different qualities, and it's kind of intensities of oak. I'll also be honest, I've only used, I want to say, the American oak because that's all we've had in the clean beer section, but French oak is also common in the winemaking world.
Right.
So when you're looking into this stuff, I would say I think you're going to be more limited in what kinds of oak you're going to be getting than choosing from, unless you're going with these new barrels that have not been necessarily charred very much or had seen spirit or wine in them prior.
Yeah.
It also matters is the grain. It's not so much the flavor as how tight the grain is, and that's how the air gets in and things like that. So it's kind of another variable. And I think really those selections are going to be made for you ahead of time. So in general, it's one choice you probably didn't have much influence in, I guess. So I think that's what
When it comes to wood products, I've used French oak cubes. This was a while back, and it was in a saison, which was very interesting. I'll give my opinions on styles and wood in a bit, but I've had French and American oak beers made next to each other, different styles, but in my opinion, you could taste a difference, and I thought it was really interesting, to say the least.
Yeah.
Obviously, so many things to consider when it comes to using a barrel. We've got to cut to a quick break. When we return, we're going to shift our attention to preparing and using barrels for beer storage. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the exChillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, The Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to exchillerator.com today to see what The Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. The brew-in-a-bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAV experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew-in-a-bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. So as we discussed earlier, there are quite a few barrel options out there, especially when you consider what used barrels originally held, wine or spirits or whatever else. However, when it comes to preparing barrels for use with beer, I have to imagine the process is pretty standard. It doesn't seem like you would change things up too much based on the type of wood or liquid it previously stored. Maybe I'm wrong?
No, I think it's pretty standard. So you got the barrel, you're looking at it, and now what do? So if it's a wine barrel, you know, in both cases, wine or spirit, you're hoping that it's still a bit wet on the inside, and if it's good. You don't have to do much. Now, if it's a little dry in the inside, you could add a little bit of the wine that maybe you could find the wine that was used there to wetten the inside, or you get the spirit. So when I got my most recent spirit barrel, it was wet, but it wasn't liquid on the inside. So I added a bit of bourbon to get it going, to get some more bourbon character back in there too.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not going to hurt. So the one thing I've heard of people doing, and you can actually build one at home, a little DIY rig, is you can steam clean the inside if you're really worried. I have heard mixed reactions to this, or mixed stuff. I know that commercially it happens, and some people have even built little steam cleaners at home to sanitize the inside. But in general, as long as it's wet and smells good, doesn't smell like mold, or doesn't smell dewy inside, then you should be good to go with just putting the liquid in there. Now, one thing that can happen is you get the barrel, it might seem a little dry on the outside. The one test for that is put it into a dark room and light some lights around it to see if you can see through the slats. And if you can, well, it's not going to hold liquid very well, so that'll be an issue. So one thing you can do is get hot water on the tops, on the heads of the barrel. This will help expand the hoops and expand the wood, and hopefully it'll all fall back together. In general, if you have a bourbon or you have the wine and you want to keep those characters, if you rinse it with hot water, it's going to leach that character out. So you're trying to limit that as much as possible. And that's why, you want to do all that upfront work in getting the barrel as fresh to you as possible. If you're thinking about, do I need to clean it or not clean it? I think that is a thought process, or sanitize. If you're trying to sanitize the inside, that thought process is really limited to the PET and that stainless steel world. You're living in the world of wood, and there are microbes. Things will happen, and that is kind of the name of the game here.
So, okay, so if I go and I get a barrel from, let's say, I'm going to break it down a little bit. I go and get the barrel from a distillery, so it had some spirit in it. I've heard of people aging in tequila barrels, whiskey barrels, all the fun stuff. So you go and you grab that barrel, and it still has a little bit of that spirit in it. It was freshly emptied, let's say within the last month or so. They left a little bit of that spirit in there to keep keep it wet. That spirit, my understanding is that spirit is high enough in alcohol that it is serving a sanitizing purpose as well. That you are, if you know, barring our pre-use with another beer, that barrel is essentially safe for use as it is, right?
I would say pretty much yes. I think there's probably an international standard for what percentage, like what a hand sanitizer, 70% or 140 proof.
Yeah.
I mean, barrels tend to be between 120 and 100 and something, right? They are always knocked down to 90 proof when you get it at the store. They're blended back with de-aerated water. So yeah, it's very high. I mean, 60+%. So they should be sanitary on the inside.
And that is, talking about this is, I suppose when you jump into the world of barrel aging or using a barrel for anything, that you're assuming an element of risk in doing this.
Yes,
and also not totally being certain how the beer is going to come out. That's another thing I've heard is every barrel has its own voice, right? It has its own thing.
That's the second. Yeah, when you mentioned earlier, we're going to run as n=1 or 2 at home. You know, with a big barrel program. The next thing is blending. That'll be kind of at the end of this, at the end of all this show about blending and making new beers. But yeah, these are all going to be their own little voyages into time. Since every barrel is unique, they're handmade in many cases. You know, you take the same beer and put it into the same quote unquote barrels from the same run of whiskey, 2 different beers. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
You have to, and we did this with my local friend of mine. He runs a brewery called Five Threads, and he just bought 4 bourbon barrels, and we were filling them up and stuff. He needed some help during one of the days, so I came over and was showing him okay, try this, don't try this. And we tasted them a little bit while later, like 3 months later. These are big 55-gallon barrels. We noticed when we emptied them, a few were drier than the others. And we made that note. We said this was a little drier, this was a little wetter. We tasted them, and yes, that correlated. The taste of the beer at that time correlated with how wet they were when we got them. So there is definitely these little things, these little parts that, you know, over time will manifest themselves in the beer when you get the barrels first. So,
yeah.
Yes.
I love that. It's almost like, you know, us I'm throwing myself out there on this one. I love the controllability when it comes to making beer. One of the most satisfying experiences for me was when I brewed Tiny Bottom Pale Ale one time, and it was almost a happy accident. I thought, that is delicious. I went back a few weeks later and brewed the same exact beer again, wondering if it would come out the same, and it was, you know, basically identical. It tasted exactly the same as I remember. And that feeling is so good. When using barrels, it's almost like you have to forego that level of predictability and control, which makes it exciting. You know, like, what am I going to get this time? You know, another question I have is, so you hear from people, I believe Denny Kahn's one of them, who has like a bourbon barrel aged imperial porter that he doesn't actually age in a barrel. He just adds bourbon to. That is going to contribute a bourbon character that I trust is, you know, characteristically different than if you were to barrel age it. But let's say I get that bourbon barrel and I want to throw some beer in there, and it has, you know, I don't know, a couple ounces maybe. I don't know how much bourbon would be left. Do you leave it in there? Do you dump it out?
Yeah,
I mean,
I would leave it in there. I think in general people do, because unless it's a lot. So I'll say in the homebrew scale, there's actually a 15-gallon barrel I have at home. It was nothing came out of it, so I added some bourbon in. At the pro scale, they're getting their barrel so fresh. There can be a gallon in a 50-gallon barrel. There can be quite a bit of bourbon left.
I'd be drinking that stuff, dude.
Yeah, stop by the house, so I'll get you some. So it's potent. So yeah, they are going to have some liquid in them. You know, they're now, when you're at the pro scale, now you're getting into some interesting ABC TTB rules about what's left in the barrel and not. But in general, you know, it should be wet. You can leave some in there, but excessive amounts is just going to make the beer probably unbalanced.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
You're trying to control the process. So taking it out, you can always put it back in, especially at the homebrew scale, make whatever you want. I would say to the, you know, differences, the big difference of a barrel versus, you know, adding cubes to a oxygen impermeable vessel is, you know, you're not going to get the small amounts of oxidation, the aging process that you would get. So, and hey, if you could make beers taste the same without using barrels, then people would just be doing that. And clearly you're making 2 different products. Now, there's huge breweries that make wood-aged beers that are phenomenal, but there's that kind of craft, small batch product where you're really reaching for the stars, and I think that's where barrels come in and just taste excellent.
Yeah.
And one of the first barrel-aged beers in the United States was Goose Island's Bourbon County.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know what they were doing. They heard they could get the barrels. They tried it out, and it was delicious. So that's where a lot of this started. So it was kind of that kind of happy accident first trial. One
of the things I can't stand in this has usually been homebrewed examples of, and I'll air quote, barrel aged beers, is when you take, and it might be a beautiful, clean imperial stout or something beforehand, but then they do whatever they do to add that bourbon character, and I love bourbon. I can drink it on its own all day long. I love it. I don't want when I take a sip of an imperial stout I don't want the experience to be an imperial stout with or basically like a shot of bourbon with a chaser of imperial stout.
You don't want a Boilermaker.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't want that burn. I don't want I want it to be balanced. I want it to have subtleties, and that to me is what makes a really good bourbon or whatever style of beer. And so it's interesting to hear you say that you would leave that spirit or that wine in the barrel, because in my head I'm thinking, well, I want to get as most subtle character as possible from the barrel that's had that bourbon in it, that has that breathing process going on. But hey, I guess I'm sure people do it both ways. I'd be interested to try side by side.
I would say, you want to get the excess out, but you don't want it to be dry. So you want to keep it. So you want a little bit, but always add it back in when you're done. You're going to leave some in there, but that's coming from how big the barrel is, how much time you want to spend on beer to spend in the barrel, that kind of thing. So I think that will get into in that character, that hot character. I think there's some good tips there about how you create your recipe to avoid that as well.
Yeah, I agree. So you broke down clean and sour. And so when it comes to preparing a barrel, I feel like we've been kind of focusing a little bit on preparing barrels for cleaner beers. So imperial stout or whatever, even a saison.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to use this barrel for a sour beer, is there anything different you would do in the preparation department?
Not really. So one kind of anecdotal way of getting the barrel with a sour, if you're doing or planning on sours, you're probably going to use a wine barrel in this case, is that if you got the wine barrel from a winery, they probably declared it Brett positive, and that's why they're giving you the barrel, because they don't want to deal with it anymore. They want the thing as far away as possible from their clean wines. So I mean, it's already, like I said, I don't think you should rinse it. You can if you want. I would not recommend it. I think you should just put the beer in there. You want to check it, of course, and make sure it looks good, but otherwise go for it.
Okay, so let's move into using said barrels. Now, on the homebrew scale, it's not like many of us are brewing 50-gallon batches, but we can kind of look past that. I think a lot of people for club uses, they do barrel projects where everybody brews, 10 people brew 5-gallon batch or whatever, and then they come and they fill the barrel. That's a lot of fun. I know Vibe does something like that.
Yeah, we've done.
What's the process for doing that though? Just kind of break it down for us.
So in both cases, I would start with, this is a kind of tip number 2, or big heuristic number 2, is start with finished beer. Do not plan on fermenting inside the barrel. Why would you not want to do that? Well, first of all, it's going to create a massive mess. That thing is going to be foaming and spilling beer out constantly during fermentation, and it's just going to create a lot of problems. People have done it. It's absolutely possible, and we can talk about some corner cases later about where this would be a good thing to do, but I would not recommend it in the first case. So we're talking about finished beer. So if this is a stout or a barley wine, it's completely fermented, all the yeast is fallen out. Now, that's for clean. For sour beer, it's definitely acceptable to start with clean finished beer, and you're doing the souring maturation or the wild maturation in the barrel, and that's how we've done it. So everyone, and this is another thing for clubs and club members that are like, I don't know if I want to do a sour at home. Well, just produce clean beer, and we're going to put it in the barrel, and when it's done, it's going to be sour, it's going to be wild, and you don't have to risk any of your equipment. So it's kind of a nice first foot in the door for someone that wants to try sour. So start with clean, finished, fermented beer.
Yeah. And also talk about the excitement of unpredictable. When you take the beers that I've had, we had quite a few, in fact, at the Southern California Homebrewers Fest that I went to a couple years ago, Andy, that was made by the Society of Barley Engineers. And they have a Solera project, which we could talk a minute about what Solera projects are, but the beauty of that kind of a project where you're having different homebrewers, first off, brew their beers, and I think most people agree on a style or a set of styles that people are going to contribute. But then all of that ends up going, once it's fermented, and it ends up going into this barrel that has who knows what in terms of microbes. I mean, we can predict pretty much what's in there. But then also that barrel character, that is a living, breathing beer that every time you pull off and add more to it, the Solera thing becomes something new and fresh, right? I mean,
yes, yeah, exactly. So the Solera method is from the wine world, is when you add liquid to a vessel and you over time remove some and add more back in. And so this way you're keeping a little bit of that old character from the beer while adding new beer and now producing and packaging some fraction of it. And the Society of Barley Engineers and their Society du Lambic, which is their sour beer offshoot, was there for one of the barrel filling days, and man, it is an operation. These guys have all their systems out in the kind of garage, kind of patio area of one guy's house where all the barrels are stored, and they're all just cranking out wort, and then they all truck it over to their cooling station with a big plate chiller, and then they run the beer through the plate chiller and into the barrels. So they're emptying, they're taking stuff, and this is a great examples of how different clubs how to do different things. Vibe, we were aging for many years, only a couple barrels, so we would meet, empty it, and then fill it, and then wait. These guys were on like 6-month rotations and a lot more barrels. So they just have a library of sour blonde beers, just tons and tons of kegs. So it's so cool to see that evolution of the beer over time.
Yeah.
Because they're running so many different batches of it.
So they are fermenting the wort in the barrel, though.
In that case, they are. And yes, in that case, they are. But they're also not aging for as long as I would do it in the barrel. So that is a slightly different case. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one. Yeah.
So in filling the barrel, then basically all you're doing is, whether it's just wort, cool wort, or a beer, you're still just racking it into a barrel.
Yes, correct.
Okay, I mean, that sounds simple enough.
It is surprisingly simple, because it's maybe deceptively simple in that case, because there's more to do along the way. But yes,
yeah. The next thing is storing the beer. I'd like to talk a little bit about. We already kind of mentioned the whole oxygen ingress thing. There is an evaporation thing that you got to mind. You want to keep that barrel topped up, depending on how long you store it.
Yep.
Is the length that you store the beer in there a function of the style? So if you're going with, say, a clean, big, high alcohol imperial stout versus a 6% sour beer.
Absolutely. So in the case of sour beers, where I have a lot more experience in the aging and the maturation, it really comes down to the generations. So, we were trying to use these barrels multiple times. So we would put beer in and wait. And then when we tasted good, take it out. So we would, the first runs of this were 24 months, because for the first 12 months, it tasted like blonde ale. It did not really taste sour at all. And so you would try it, top it off, try it. You can do some things like feeding it maltodextrin along the way to try to encourage sour beer, the wild microbes to produce more flavor. And then, so that's years. And then eventually you're going to have the right flavor. And, then it comes to scheduling and everything like that to get new beer into it. I started in March a clean bourbon barrel project at my house, and I added stout to it. And I had done a ton of research into what kind of style of beer I wanted, which I was pretty serious about stout. And then, what recipe, having, in this case, a very high finishing gravity, and I'll get into that why in a second. And then monitoring it after about 3 months, I added, this is a classic tip people have for barrels, that you add the Vinny nail, which is a stainless steel nail. You'll drill a hole near the bottom of one of the heads of the barrel, and then you add a stainless steel nail to that, so you can take small samples without going through the top bunghole. And around month 5, I'm like, okay, this is tasting how I want it. And in month 6, so a few days, actually about a week ago, I emptied it. I added more beer to that one as well. So that was only 6 months, smaller barrel, but only 6 months. So it gets into the size, it gets into the style, but in general, you want to monitor it. So is it tasting how you want to taste it? Is it tasting how you want it to taste? Yes. Then it's probably the right time to take it.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to wait too long, and then, it may not be bad. It might not be what you wanted, and then we're going to have to get into blending, which is another topic.
That's an interesting the when to empty it, and I love the idea of how about you keg it up when it tastes how you want it to taste? I mean, that's good advice. I had a beer one time. I think there are people out there who look at this whole thing and they're like, time is what will determine the best beer. The longer you can wait, the more patient you are, that old virtuous thing called patience. The more patient you are, the better off you are. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. I had a beer, must have been 4 or 5 years ago now, that somebody made and had left it in a barrel for, I think it was 2 years. It was a porter. There was it wasn't funky. It didn't turn, nothing like that. There was a really odd wateriness to it that I have to imagine wasn't a part of the beer when it was made, like 2 or 3 years, however long the guy had it in the barrel. But I did some research and digging into it, and I saw other people saying the same thing, that too much time in the barrel can kind of contribute this odd thinness to a beer that may not even be, technically a thinner or dry beer.
Yes. I think this gets into a couple things. One is, like you said, time. The other one is a base recipe choice. And this is where I think clean barrel aging and sour wild barrel aging are totally different. In the wild barrel stuff, what we did was we kind of had a base recipe. We said, everyone brew this. And that's something you have to kind of really get people to really swear to, is brew this recipe. So it's all the same worts. You'll be surprised.
Yeah, don't be funky, man. Yeah,
I don't blame anyone, but just watch everyone and just make sure you do the right recipe and gather the wort, and that's it. Because what you're really wanting to, the ingredient that you care most about is the microbes.
That's right.
You're just giving them a substrate to age on and go crazy. So if you're trying to produce a certain style, like a Flanders Red, well, that's going to require certain ingredients. But sour blonde, some base Pilsner malt, some maltodextrin, off you go. Now, what I've learned in doing a lot of, upfront work, because the clean barrel aging of the stout, let's be serious, I used about 3 sacks of grain to fill this barrel. So, I want it to be good. The big takeaway I found was you want a very high original gravity, leaving you at the very high finishing gravity, higher mash temps, all those things, because you're going to allow the barrel to lower the finishing gravity a bit more and leave you with sweetness to counteract the alcohol. And that's what I did in this most recent beer. It was north of 112. I haven't taken a finishing gravity yet, but you had 1030s, 1040s, so it's still a very big beer. It's 10-12%, but it's not in a low FG, and that barrel can meet with the tannins and the residual sugars and still leave you with a rich product, not a thin product. And I think that is, of anything I've learned and just trying that and kind of taking that on faith and really basing it around commercial beer. If you read all the bottles of commercial beer, they'll tell you they'll tell you the finishing gravity and the alcohol, and you can get the original gravity, and you'll be like, whoa, this thing is huge. Yeah. And I think that's a critical variable to go high original gravity in the clean barrel aging.
Yeah. So you got this beer. It's delicious. You've tasted it, whether it's clean, whether it's sour, but you've determined it's time to move forward. It's time to put this thing in a keg or bottles. How do you go about emptying that barrel?
So if it's a small one barrel or a big barrel, it might be a little unwieldy to pick up and do a gravity racking or something like that. And there's another reason not to do that, which is more air going into the barrel. So what we've done is, and we learned this trick when we first got our first barrel, because our first barrel was stored near a commercial brewery, so we could use some of their equipment. They were cool with us just borrowing some of the tools, was that there's something called a bulldog tap. It's a long metal tube that has a pressurizable collar to it. So you shove this tube in there and you can actually pressurize the barrel with a few PSI and force the beer out the tube. And so this tool, it's not cheap, but hey, you can make one at home for virtually nothing. You probably already have all the tools already. If you take a stopper that fits the top of the barrel and you drill, it's a solid stopper, and you drill 2 holes in it, one for a racking cane and one for gas, you can just empty the barrel in place. So you're displacing air with CO2, or displacing beer with CO2, and it's coming out the top, and that's it. You can empty the barrel completely. And what's nice about this technique is you can also just go right into a keg. So you go into a keg, and that's it. And I think this is the best way to do it because you're not putting more air back in. I mean, it depends on what you're going to do with the barrel next, and we'll talk about that after you empty it. But it's putting just CO2 back in, so it's a nice inert gas. And then what you can do, another kind of tip, if you're doing this as a project with multiple people and you have to divide the beer up, how do I know how much beer to give everyone? Well, if you have a scale and you put your keg on the scale and tear the weight, you can just give people pounds of beer and then circulate amongst all the people until you've given everyone their fraction of the beer.
Yeah.
Remember, if you're not topping off enough, you're not going to get as much beer as you put in. But the beer you're getting should be infinitely better than the beer you put in. So that's the point in the end, anyways.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the beer's out. You've now got this empty barrel, and I know that this one is going to have different responses depending on the type of beer you made, whether it was clean or a sour beer. But you've got this empty barrel. Let's say you're not doing a Solera, you're not going to fill it up immediately. If you're going to store that barrel, are there like time limits with which you should do that? Should you leave some beer in there? Should you empty it out and rinse it with water?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. It depends on what kind of thing you're going to do next. I would say, like I said, I think I have a lot more experience in the sour beer side than the clean. But for the sour beer stuff, since it took aged for so long, we wanted to make sure anything old yeast and things like that was totally out of it. So what we would do is we would empty it. We would get hot water and we would kind of roll the barrel around and just rinse out any of the detritus that was at the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
And then before we would refill it. Now, in sour beer making, and you can definitely read more about this on the Milk the Funk wiki, because there's been tons of data on how to store these barrels. Because in general, the wine barrels are worth a lot more money because the wood is such a high quality that these things can last for a long time if they're taken care of. So there's something called barrel storage solution, which is a blend of citric acid, some metabisulfites and things like that. And this can actually halt any type of mold or microbes growing in the barrel for some period of time. There's some modifications for sour beer aging, so you don't get as much of that sulfur compound left in the beer. You basically knock that down a few pegs so that you don't get that carrying over in the beer. And then you can store a barrel for weeks at a time.
Yeah.
If you fill it up immediately. And that's a perfectly good way of doing it. In general, though, we try to fill them immediately. So just trying to schedule, if you're in a group setting, schedule time and stuff like that. But you can use storage solution. And now in clean barrel aging, I think you would lose a lot of flavor if you did the storage solution. I think it's still a viable technique. So I'd be looking at filling it immediately. But yeah, looking into barrel storage solution is probably your best bet, because that will allow you to have some buffer time if you need to make more beer. But I would still recommend trying to fill it as soon as possible.
I was going to ask, is it so really it's not that difficult to plan a brew day around when you're emptying the barrel. Just do that, right? I mean, you want that beer to go in there as soon as possible.
I mean, I know it's a pain to do all the scheduling, and it's 10 people schedules and how many fermenters and all this stuff, but you make a day of it, and I think you'll be much happier with the results if you just giving that planning ahead and stuff. And I mean, it could take a month. If you think the barrel is good now, then you should say, okay, everyone, 4 weeks, we're going to empty it. That kind of thing, right? So like, if you're going to give everyone the high sign and say, hey, get ready, and that's what you have to do. And so in the case of the clean barrel I have at home, I was tasting it in month 5, and I said, okay, I need to make a new beer, so I made a triple. Because I liked a Belgian triple in one of our previous clean barrels that we did. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to crank this beer out right now, and then it'll be ready in time. And that's what we did. So
yeah. Now I have to imagine that when it comes to sour beers and barrel aging, that you can pretty much reuse that barrel infinitely, maybe not infinitely. That's a big word.
Almost infinitely.
But because like you said this earlier, what you're aiming for there is that wood to hang on to those microbes, that the souring, microbes, the bacteria and the wild yeast and all that, which it does a really good job of over time. And every time, I would imagine every time you put a beer into that, you're getting a fresh round of those microbes that are absorbing or sticking to that wood. So it's not like you have a necessarily too limited of a number of uses for that barrel. When it comes to clean beers, I'm going off based what you said earlier. It sounds like as soon as you start to lose that barrel character that you're interested in, it may be time to give up that barrel. But is it possible to maybe like refresh the bourbon character between batches if you just toss a fifth of bourbon in there or something? Or?
I think that's a very, very viable solution. So in terms of clean barrel aging or bourbon barrel, or sorry, clean barrel aging or sour aging, you mentioned for sours, yes, you want to keep using it. And I will say, we ran about 4 turns of those barrels in the club. I think the best sour came out of the second barrel turn, because the microbes had time to really grip on and hold on. They just made a better beer the second time around, because we didn't always add more microbes with every turn. We would just let the barrel do its thing. So for clean barrel aging, you can absolutely add more bourbon to it, let it soak back up, and you can get that character again. What I'm personally more interested in is letting it go, but stepping the beer down over time. So it started with stout, now it's going to be triple, and then maybe beers that can take a little longer to they're a little more delicate, but they can absorb slight oak character, slight bourbon character, and then be that nuance rather than a big beer from there. So we'll see. I think there's no reason not to try that at the home scale, because that's the whole point, is to maximize use.
Yeah.
When to end a barrel is I think a very important thing to think about. If it's a clean barrel aging, obviously, if it ever gets any negative characters like Brettanomyces and things like that, which I think as hard as you try, it will eventually happen.
Yeah.
That there'll be some kind of off flavor, and there's really cool clean beers that have a little Brett character to them. I mean, there's nothing wrong there. But for sour barrel aging, and this is a big one, is if you get a lot of acetic acid character or alpha, you have there's a solvent character. I'm blanking on the name of it right now. It's more of a paint thinner kind of character.
Right.
That one, there's really no turning away from that one. That one is, that's the end of that barrel, in my opinion, because it's very hard to remove that character, and you're better off finding a new barrel at that point. Yeah.
What happens if, I'm sure people are wondering this listening right now, and I am as well. Let's say I've got a clean barrel, it was a bourbon barrel. It's starting to lose some of its barrel character that I really want to get from it in my porter and stout and whatnot. But then I start to notice maybe it's got a little bit of a funky thing going on. Could I then... in the commercial world of brewing, if you screw up a batch, it goes down the drain. That's kind of a show of how solid you are of a brewer. Yeah. Like, you're willing to drop. Can you then convert that clean barrel into a sour barrel and maybe give that a shot? I would imagine you'd have to inoculate the barrel with more microbes that you're really looking for, but that could potentially work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, up front we were talking about different types of wood and grain and stuff. And in general, for the bourbon barrels, they're thinner staves, so you have to watch that air exposure, but there's no reason not to try it, and just monitor the situation. And I think that it would work really well. I think, again, looking at the ingredient of the barrel being charred or not, if you've spent the wood and you think you've gotten that really harsh characters out of it, then just add a pitch of, there's East Coast yeast, there's bootleg biology, there's all that stuff, and give it a shot. And if you had nothing else to do with the barrel and willing to take a chance, I think you could have some really excellent beer at the end of that day.
Yeah. So the final thing I want to hit on before we talk a little bit about styles that I think our own anecdotal experiences with different barrel aged styles. I don't think we spent much time at all talking about temperature and what a good barrel aging temperature is, or storing that barrel. To me, it seems obvious that room temperature, maybe some minor fluctuation of 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like 2 to 4, 2 to 5 degrees Celsius. But maybe right around that 68F or 20C mark.
Yeah, because this is still beer in the end of the day. You don't want to see large temperature variation, because what that's definitely going to do in the case of a barrel is let air in.
Right.
We talked about we want to slow air. So if it's expanding and contracting, unlike bourbon where they wanted the expansion and contraction, we don't. So, we've done it in hot rooms. I don't think the results were as optimal as if they were temperature controlled or room temperature. But another thing is, these barrels, if they're big, they do hold temperature. There's some thermal mass there. So the smaller, the less thermal mass. So there's one game to play there too. So yes, I would recommend a stable temperature, lower room temperature. In the commercial sector, what I've been seeing is them actually going to a room that's more like 60 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, that's what I've seen too.
So I think that's more just to, again, we said many times, checking on the beer and tasting it. The lower the temperature, the slower things are going to happen. So they give them more running room to be like, okay, it's time to empty this, that kind of thing. They can monitor and make decisions. So yes, I would say it's, I wouldn't store it, in a fridge. I would not store it in a fridge because that's going to really shut a lot of things down and maybe cause other issues down the road, with cracking of the wood or something like that too. Because the wood is existing and it's going to start to dry out and things like that.
Yeah.
But you want to, I think room temp is good. I have it in a closet that's kind of got walls all around it, so it's not seeing too much of any sun or cool air. So that's good. But yeah, I mean, it also depends on where you can. As a complete counterpoint to this, the Society of Barley Engineers, Society du Lambic, those barrels are just outside behind a guy's house.
Well, that is San Diego, so it's not like it's getting to the 110 degrees like
it's not getting
here.
too hot and not getting too cold. But again, those are just outside in the elements. So
yeah, that's fascinating. All right, let's. You have motivated me. I'm very interested now, much more so in barrels than I was before. Good job there, Andy. I do want to finish with what are we know the styles of beer that are standard for barrel aging.
Yeah.
You got your imperial stout, your imperial porter, or even just your standard stout and porter. You've got your sour beers, your Flemish reds, your Oud Bruins, all that stuff. Are there styles that you've had that are barrel aged that you thought, wow, I would never have expected that, but this is really quite nice?
So I think that's coming off of what I said earlier. I just did a stout barrel and I did a Belgian triple. So why I did this was a few years ago, Vibe got a bourbon barrel and we started with quadruple and then we put triple in it. And I thought the quad was really good. It had some nice bourbon character. I mean, it's a strong beer to begin with. It's aged really nicely, but man, that fresh barrel-aged triple really blew my mind because I didn't think that the oak would work so well with the triple kind of pear spice character.
Yeah.
I mean, it just knocked it right out of the park. It is seriously one of my favorite beers we made as a club. I take a lot of pride in the sour beer production, but man, that triple was delicious. It
sounds amazing. And, we didn't spend too much time talking about the oak characteristics, but you're talking about vanillins, you get that kind of creamy vanilla thing. That sounds phenomenal. Somebody sent us a beer, I believe it was already reviewed by Jersey and Tim, that was like a gin barrel aged thing, I believe. And I mean, it was a triple as well, and I found the other bottle of it in my fridge last week and popped the thing open, and it was phenomenal. I mean, there is something special about that Perry, phenolic Belgian thing and the blend. This one was gin, but man, that blend of that kind of vanilla stuff. Ooh, it's so good. What about? I'll tell you what. I'm going to start this one off. Beers that I thought just did not work well barrel aged. I had a barrel aged, just standard American IPA a couple years ago, and I could not finish the pint. It was horrendous. Could have been the brewer. I don't know, but it was terrible.
Yeah. It's tough because what you think, these beers all taste good, so they should all work. And I think again, like all ingredients, not all ingredients should go together. And you have to think about, again, it's intention. And I think the moral of the game here with barrel aging is, in a lot of beer making, is with intent. So what am I going to get from adding this ingredient, and what are the potential negatives with tannins and stuff? If you already have a bitter beer like IPA, that's not going to fly.
Right.
It's just going to be all kind of a mess. I'm trying to think of cases where what I wouldn't do, lighter styles, things that need that delicacy and they need to be fresh. That's really not what barrel aging is meant to do. You're going to be months, so you have to build that character in. I think one thing to explore is one thing to try is the blending aspect of what wouldn't work and what would work. So if you have some commercial barrel aged beers, and trying those in blends with other beers to see what characters those add, and then do those work or not work, and you have to kind of play around that game. And I think there's also some discovery to be made there too, that it's not just 2 + 2 = 4. You have to kind of think and blend and try and go from there.
Yeah, it's really the gestalt. Yeah.
And in the sour beer world, we're relying so much on Belgium to show us the original stuff, but now in the United States, with the explosion of sour beer producers and wild ale producers, I think I've seen every variation of fruit addition or spice addition and stuff, and where you're getting their inspiration from is more cocktails and things like that than anything else. So really, there is, I would say, I think there's things that don't work for sure, like you said, IPA or wood and that. But I think there's more things to try, and then you see what your palate dictates in that end, because it's just going to be kind of an exploration of what you can and can't do. Yeah.
On the blending note, you mentioned earlier the brewery and how they had that series where they released the same beer that was aged in the different wood barrels. My buddy Chad brought those over here. He's a member of the brewery's bottle club thing. And one of the more fun things that we did was different levels, different ratios of blending those. I think it was 4 different beers or 3 different beers together.
3 different beers,
and it's a lot of fun. And did they taste different? You better believe that those 3 beers tasted absolutely different. So there is something to say about the type of wood that you're using for your barrel. Well, clearly there's a lot more that goes into brewing with a barrel than just racking beer into it and waiting. I think we covered a good amount of it. I know I certainly learned some interesting stuff from you, Andy, so I appreciate that, and I hope our listeners did as well. Is there anything else you'd like to throw out there before we wrap things up?
I think, give it a shot. Get a couple of your club members together, go in on a barrel. You read up on it, think, again, brewing with the intention, and go for it. And I think you're going to be successful in your first go around, and just make great beer. And don't be afraid of it not working out, because then you've learned something and you can try it again.
Couldn't agree more. Don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to stay current on everything we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.